Neighborhood Alliance, the BNA. On behalf of the BNA and the Town Meeting Members Association and the League of Women Voters of Brookline, I want to welcome everybody to the Spring Warrant Review. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it very much. Earlier today, I was thinking about what I was going to say tonight, and I was reflecting on what was really kind of a bruising election season. I felt like there was a high level of negativity floating around, and I wanted to address that head on. And I sat down and I wrote all these bullet points on it, and then my heart rate went up, and I'm just like, wait a second, no, this is not good. And I took a step back, took a couple of deep breaths, and decided, we don't want this to be negative, that's for sure. So I thought about the conversations that I've had over the past few days in organizing this event. I've talked to most of the presenters, and I've had several conversations back and forth. And everybody's heart is in the right place here, and that's a really important thing. Everybody wants what's best for Brookline. Everybody's willing to compromise. That's what I'm hearing in the phone calls that I've had. It was a busy few days, and it was a really good busy few days. This event itself is a positive event. I've helped organize 14 of them, I was counting, and I can't think of a single time that we've ever had anything out of hand happen. That nothing's ever gotten out of hand, and we've always discussed very controversial articles. But it's always been civil. And so I'm excited about that tonight. I'm excited, again, to see serious issues discussed and discuss them civilly. We look forward to that. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We have 3 different warrant articles, or sets of warrant articles. We're going to talk about Articles 17 through 22, which are the marijuana articles. And I expect we'll hear a high-level summary of what's going on, and then we'll focus on the issue of whether to zone marijuana in L districts or restrict them to only G. Recreational marijuana is coming, and we have to recognize that. And I know that both sides of this argument are looking out for Brookline's best interests. The next article that we're going to discuss is Article 31, and that's sustainable food containers. The goal of that article is to make local food packaging more sustainable and healthful. Again, both sides to that issue have their version of the big picture in mind. The night's going to end talking about Cypress Field. It's going to be renovated with either a grass surface or a synthetic turf surface. Again, we've got 2 sides, and both feel like they're properly representing what's best for the town of Brookline. I've personally been involved with 2 of these 3 issues, and I've spoken to the folks here tonight about them. I certainly have agreed and disagreed with much or some of what has been said, but I left those conversations, again, feeling really positive about it. The people who are here tonight that are presenting are well-meaning people. They're intelligent, they're going to be saying relevant things, and they're informed people. It's hard to be informed, right? We all know that. It's just not easy to be informed about this stuff and to be able to speak on it. And it's difficult to take a stand on these things. There's always somebody that knows more than you, or there's somebody who thinks they know more than you, and they're perfectly willing to tell you that. It can get ugly, it can get personal. And it takes so much time to be informed and to take a stand. But it's how we get things accomplished. It's how we run our town. So we owe these folks a debt of gratitude. And I thank them, regardless of which side they're on, and I hope that you will thank them too. I hope that we leave here tonight feeling better informed about how to guide the town of Brookline, and I hope that we leave feeling a little bit better about who is leading the way to do that. So with that positivity in mind, let's get the night started. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator, Amelia Koch of the League of Women Voters of Brookline.
Well said, Dan. I actually have 3 words on the topic: civil, informative discourse. That's what we're going to be doing tonight. And as part of doing that, it's good to have a framework. And the framework for tonight is that each position will be allocated 6 minutes for a beginning statement, and marijuana will get 10. Each position will be allocated 90 seconds to respond to each question. And by the way, since we're timekeeping, it helps if you actually have someone who notifies you if that time is up. And we have someone sitting in the front row with whom I work all the time and who's outstanding at this, and it's Lee Cook Childs. And if you're going to be speaking, If you're going to be speaking, watch Lee. She'll give you some markers along the way to make sure she guides you to the point where you can close your statement out gracefully. And if you need a little bit more help, I'll be there too. Then each position will be allocated 3 minutes for a closing statement. The order of presentation follows. Pro position will go first in the opening statements, followed by con position. The moderator will designate which position will respond first to each question, alternating between the positions. The con position will go first in closing statements, followed by the pro position. Questions will be solicited from the audience using index cards during the presentations. A team of 3 representatives, one from the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance, one from the Town Meeting Members Association, and one from the League of Women Voters, are going to review the questions submitted and select legible cards representative of the array of questions asked. The selected cards will be presented to me, and then I'll bring those and ask them of the speakers. And protracted questions with introductions and a reflection of the author's personal position will not be considered. Ideally, questions are addressed so that both sides can respond. With that said, let us begin. And Linda Pelkey, and I see Craig's up there.
Hello.
We're arranging for there to be a presentation?
There'll just be a couple of maps shown.
A couple of maps. Wonderful. Okay, so beginning with the pro position, you have 6 minutes for an opening statement.
10.
10.
Oh, this is marijuana.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and welcome especially to our new town meeting members. I'm going to be presenting a summary of the recreational marijuana warrant articles, Articles 17 through 22, and I'm going to be focusing specifically on Article 17 more. Before launching into the particulars, I'll make a few general comments, and I would also like to acknowledge that Select Board Member Bernard Green is here to help us answer questions. In November of 2016, question 4 concerning legalizing recreational marijuana was on the ballot. 76% of eligible Brookline voters, which was nearly 30,000 voters, cast ballots that day, with 60% approving the legalization of recreational marijuana in Massachusetts. This fact dictates Brookline's status within the State Cannabis Control Commission's regulations. For instance, in order to lower the cap on the number of licenses granted to retail marijuana shops or to eliminate a particular type of business, we would be required to have a 2/3 vote in town meeting and then a town-wide vote on that question. Social consumption businesses, think a bar instead of alcohol, you have weed, are not yet eligible to apply for a state license. Once the Cannabis Control Commission issues regulations for this use, if they ever do, Brookline would need to have a petitioned townwide vote on whether or not we want this type of business in Brookline. We should commend and thank all of those who have given a great deal of thought and care in creating what's before us, especially the License Review Committee, the Planning Board, Patty Correa in Town Council's office, and Francesco Torres in the Planning Department. The public involvement and outreach on these warrant articles has been extraordinary, and it's really just the finest product I think I've seen our staff in Town Hall ever produce. It's a really good job. How many of you participated in the online survey when the draft regulations were circulated? Excellent, excellent, okay. So you'll hear a lot about caps on the number of special permits or licenses being granted. The cap number currently stands at 4, based on 20% of our liquor licenses. For each of these 3 types of retail marijuana businesses, retail shops, social consumption, and delivery-only retail, each one of those could have 4 licenses. The other types of marijuana businesses are not subject to a cap. The State Cannabis Control Commission is poised to start issuing licenses retail marijuana businesses this July 1st. Our existing medical marijuana provider, Netta, has already applied for a recreational license, and the town has already negotiated and adopted a host community agreement with them. As far as the state is concerned, the number of licenses are not capped per town. If we fail to pass Warrant Articles 17 and 18, we will have very little oversight over the operations of marijuana businesses in Brookline. So now I'd like to direct your attention to the handout that I passed out, which has both a summary of the warrant articles and on the back a map. So first I'm going to go through really quickly what the 6 warrant articles are. So Article 17 is the zoning bylaw. It includes the caps on the number of special permits as well as operational and siting requirements. Article 18 is a general bylaw amendment which establishes a select board licensing framework for marijuana establishments similar to liquor licensing and medical marijuana. Article 19 provides a mechanism for town meeting to seek to lower the number of licenses, to eliminate uses, or to eliminate uses. This would require a town meeting vote and a town-wide vote. Article 20 is a general bylaw amendment covering regulation of marijuana and hemp usage outside of establishments, such as prohibiting public consumption or having open containers in your car, things like that. Article 21 is a general bylaw amendment identifying departments responsible for enforcement. And Article 22 establishes a 3% local option tax on retail sales that would come into the town. And this is on top of the 3% that is included in the host community agreement. So that would be a total of 6%. You could call it all tax revenue coming to the town. So to familiarize ourselves with the various citing restrictions in Article 17, for me it helped to sort the requirements by the type of business. And that's what the chart is all about on the back of the map. So the most highly regulated are the retail establishments. I think you're going to want to put the map up now, Dan. So if you look at the map, the blobs with the, it's on the back of your thing too, and we're going to show it larger here. So the blobs with the cross-hatching are the 500-foot buffers for public and private K through 12 schools. Retail shops cannot locate within the buffer area, and these shops must also be at least 200 feet from any other retail marijuana shop. Retail shops have a maximum size limit of 5,000 square feet, and they are allowed currently in our general and local business districts. On the map, the general business districts are green, and the local business districts are light orange. The Select Board is proposing an amendment to the main motion that would exclude social consumption shops from the L districts. There's also another proposed amendment coming out in our supplemental mailing which seeks to remove storefront retail shops from the L district as well. So one step below the retail shops are the non-storefront establishments. They are delivery-only retailers, cultivators, and product manufacturers. These businesses may not locate within 200 feet of a K through 12 school. Delivery and cultivation businesses can locate in the general and local business districts, as well as office and industrial. The manufacturing can only be permitted within the I district, which is the dark gray areas on the map, which is very limited. And one step below those are the marijuana research and testing businesses, which are not subject to any school buffers or density restrictions and are allowed in the G, O, and I districts. So in addition to these citing restrictions, both warrant Articles 17 and 18 contain extensive operational requirements that are applicable to all marijuana establishments, which govern things such as access, they limit nuisance, and they promote the public health and safety. These are redundant between the special permit conditions in 17 and the licensing scheme in 18, in part because we do not yet know if the Attorney General will approve our licensing scheme, and also because the zoning will go into effect immediately if it passes town meeting. The Attorney General approval for the licensing scheme in Warrant Article 18 could take up to 3 months. And finally, no marijuana establishment can open in a building with a pre-existing daycare center. I'm looking forward to your questions.
And speaking of questions, we have someone here who's prepared to gather your cards, so put your hand up if you've got one, or if you need one. And once the statements are done, questions what will be next, so it'd be lovely to have the questions ready when we're done. Please, you have 10 minutes.
Thanks. I'm Craig Boland. Currently a town meeting member from Precinct 8, although I did not run for another term. So at the start of this town meeting, I'll be one of the public again. I got my start in Brookline civic affairs with neighborhoods. I remember being one of, I think it was 8 people in a living room back on a wintry day in February in 1972, and when we decided to form the North Brookline Neighborhood Association. There weren't any neighborhood associations at that time in our part of town, as far as I knew. They were in some more prestigious places. Fisher Hill had one, and Cottage Farm had one, but we didn't have anything in our area. 30 years later, I became the founding co-chair of this organization, the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance. And in between, I did several things. I was a board member on the former Redevelopment Authority and the former Rent Control Board, and I chaired the advisory committee. I also organized in 1973 a town-wide effort called the Neighborhood Rezoning Coalition, and it was my basic introduction to zoning. As a result of that, it's kind of wired into my head now. But I understand that people who don't have that kind of background are going to find it difficult to understand all these fine points in Brookline zoning, and that's something that you have to cope with marijuana, because a large part of the controversy in that area does revolve around zoning. You need to understand what can happen, what might not happen, and it's an area of concern. I was one of those people that Linda referred to. I was one of the 60% who voted in favor of legalizing marijuana. Had a little contact with it 50 years ago when I was in college, but when you start to raise a family and build a career and develop community contacts, there are some things that just don't fit. That was one of them. So I haven't known anything about the culture since that period of time. But I do remember some things from that period of time, and I have at least a couple of personal experiences since that time that I'm going to mention at some point. Anyway, as a voter, I was informed by the very cautious, stepwise, amply publicized process that Brookline undertook for medical marijuana just a few years before. It was a 2-year process. We have now only one medical marijuana dispensary in the town. It's down, if you don't know it, it's the old Brookline Bank building at the corner of Route 9, Washington Street, and High Street. As far as I know, it hasn't had any major problems, although goodness knows the neighborhood was fearful that there would be problems. So I expected that Brookline would take a go-slow approach to recreational marijuana, and was kind of surprised to see a much more aggressive approach in both time and permissiveness with recreational marijuana than with medical marijuana. I've watched the process. I've been to a number of public meetings at which it's been reviewed. Many of you probably have too. I'm kind of surprised by the tenor of the reviews. The point that Linda referred to, that's the point of contention for me, is whether we put marijuana shops, marijuana cafes in the local business zones, or whether we keep them just in the general business zones. If you're not familiar with this, Brookline has 7 major general business zones. They're about what you would expect. We've got Commonwealth Avenue, Coolidge Corner, Washington Square, Brookline Village, the busy tip of, the western tip of Route 9 near the Chestnut Hill Mall, and a couple of smaller places. We have one in my area up at the tip of Harvard Street, just going into Alston. There's another one at the tip of Route 9 going into Boston at the Riverway. The local business zones, on the other hand, thread through residential neighborhoods. They come pretty close to schools, and they're just more of a concern. With medical marijuana, we don't allow medical marijuana in the local business zone at all. Not by special permit, just not at all. In the new zoning that's proposed under Article 17, we consider marijuana treatment facilities. We don't allow those in local business zones. Those can only go in general business zones. So why is it that we would allow recreational marijuana shops and marijuana cafes that may pose considerably greater hazards than these medical uses? Well, I don't know. I wasn't among the people who drafted this legislation. I've only looked at it since it's been available to the public and it's been reviewed. But I am concerned. I think we're being too aggressive. Town meeting is going to be faced with a 3-way choice, thanks to the reviews by the advisory committee and the Board of Selectmen, now the Select Board. We have to get used to that, as Mr. Green is always wont to remind us. It's a 3-way choice in that we might have local business zones with neither the shops nor the cafes. We might have local business zones with only the cafes, or we might have local business zones with both. The advisory committee currently favors both. The Board of Selectmen favors only cafes, and a group of town meeting members who are going to be filing an amendment favor neither. I'm among that group. Why do we want to do marijuana shops outside the general business zones? Well, I don't know quite. I think somebody else is going to have to tell us why, because I haven't myself heard any convincing reasons. Under the proposals in these Articles 17 through 22, we will have, at least in the near future, only 3 marijuana shop licenses to grant, since it appears that NETA has taken one of the 4. But we have 7 general business zones to put them in. Washington Square is pretty much shadowed by the buffer zones around Driscoll School, but the other 6 zones are not shadowed in that way, and they have many sites. These things are a real and personal hazard. It's not a joke. It's not something to smirk about. I have personally seen families ripped apart, careers abandoned, and lives uprooted by kids who got hold of this stuff early in life and just somehow never got engaged in adult lives. It's not a joke. One life lost to this is far too many. Looking around at the reviews of this, I think the problem that we got is the color of money. I believe that the color of money has eroded Brookline's civic spirit. I've seen something, it's an undertone, but my read on it is an attitude that I've got mine, Jack, and to heck with your neighborhoods. I hate that when I see that. I don't believe that people would say that out loud. I'm interpreting. But I think we've got to be careful. I think we have to go slow on this, just as we did with medical marijuana, and see if it works. Maybe if we're lucky, it will work. And maybe in a few years, we'll say, well, it's not that much of a problem. We don't need to be quite as cautious as we started out being. But I want to leave you with this thought. The health of neighborhoods is the health of the town. The health of the town is the health of neighborhoods.
Thank you very much. All right, so Greg, we'll begin with you. Does the 200-foot barrier go across town lines? Why would we put our property at a disadvantage versus Boston or Newton if yes?
I'm not sure what the question means. Does it go across town lines?
Well, suppose we focus on the second piece. Is the limitation that you propose, is that going to put us at a disadvantage versus Boston or Newton?
I should think that protecting our neighborhoods is a terrific advantage.
Great. Linda?
Well, I'm going to try to answer the question. So I believe what they're asking about is the 200-foot density spacing requirement, and it does go across town borders. So a shop would not be allowed to set up shop closer than 200 foot, even if that shop was in Newton or Boston.
Very good. And do you have a response at all to the second part of the question?
Which was?
Why would we put our property at disadvantage versus Boston or Newton?
I'm not sure in what way the person asking the question thinks we're putting our property at a disadvantage. I guess my thinking on the question between the G and the L zones, districts, is that that it's important not to have just one retail outlet in town because of the amount of traffic going to that. And this question came up when I sat on the zoning bylaw committee and we reviewed these proposals. And our thinking at that time was that it was better to have more options. Also, if you look at the map and you see where the 500-foot buffer zones are, you'll see that they take a great deal of space in a lot of the G district in the village. Also, I kind of question this way of thinking that the L's are in a residential neighborhood, but the G's aren't. Because I think we can all think of a situation where there is a neighborhood or residential property very, very near a G district. So to me, it's all in our residential districts. That's one of our challenges in Brookline. That's why we're always struggling with commercial development, how to develop in commercial areas without impacting neighborhoods. And I think that's pretty much across the town and not so much focused on this distinction between the two zones.
Great, thank you very much. And you're watching for 90 seconds? Okay, so a second question from the same person, and let me see if I can put this one and perhaps one more on the table, and Linda will begin this time with you. Why is a 200-foot buffer between establishments necessary? And, well, actually, let's just ask that question and see if we can.
Yeah, this was developed by our planning department and also the planning board. Their feeling was they didn't want to create clusters of shops, and therefore it would degrade and possibly even displace some of our treasured local businesses. So their thinking was if we don't let them all cluster together, we would be doing better at maintaining our commercial areas in terms of variety and accessibility and just not creating like a weed zone kind of place.
Very good. Mr. Bolin, would you care to answer?
I think Linda's right. The experience that we had that guided that was surely the experience in Colorado that had very weak zoning controls. Neighborhoods in Colorado got, according to people who live there, slammed with marijuana shops sprouting up 3 or 4 to a block. We certainly didn't want anything like that happening here. I'm not sure that 200 feet is enough to do the job, but it's a far better approach than you had in an almost uncontrolled situation that has been a guide to what the kind of hazards that can occur.
Very good, thanks. All right, next. What if a school or education center moves or is built once a shop has a license? Mr. Bullen.
The licenses, I was very concerned about this question, and I posed this question to the people in the planning board, the planning department. The answer, and I think it's traceable to the general laws of Massachusetts, once you give a zoning permit, you have given the permit, it's gone. You probably can't take it back. If the school moves that was shadowing a zone, and the zone is opened up, and there is a marijuana permit that can be granted. If you grant it, it's gone. You'll never be able to get it back unless there's some kind of fraud that was involved in getting it in the first place.
Ms. Pelkey.
I am actually not sure about the license. My impression is that the town has discretion over whether to grant a license or not, and since if we achieve the Article 18 license review, then those individual businesses would be coming before the board, the select board, each year. In terms of something locating within the buffer or closer than 200 feet after the fact, I think it's similar to what happened with the daycare going in next to the medical marijuana, and it's a question of before you permit it rather than it having an impact afterwards.
Very good, thank you. If the warrant articles proposing caps fail, will establishments be permitted without caps or not permitted at all? Ms. Pelkey?
If the warrant articles.
If the warrant articles proposing caps
Yes.
fail,
Yes.
will establishments be permitted without caps or
Yes.
not permitted at all?
Yes, yes. So this is, I think to answer Mr. Boland's concern about how, quote unquote, aggressive this zoning seems, the answer for why it is the way it is because of the State Cannabis Control Commission and their intent to permit these businesses in towns and cities that voted yes, without these extraordinary measures of us going to another townwide vote and relitigating the whole question. So yes, there are no caps as far as the state is concerned. So this is one way of us limiting. And to my thinking, the operational requirements are what's really going to make the quality of life difference to Brookline. And we would not get those. We would not have access to those if we do not pass the warrant articles.
Very good. Mr. Boland?
I think Linda is essentially correct, but you have to keep in mind the distinction between the special permits under zoning and the licenses to operate a business once a special permit allows that business to go in. The special permits that enable the use of a property for the marijuana shop or the marijuana cafe are the things to watch out for, because once those have been granted, you probably can't get them away. The business licenses, on the other hand, are comparable to the licenses that we now have for liquor shops. Many of the same principles apply. The select board can certainly police those. They pretty routinely do police the liquor licenses that we have. So once you've permitted a shop to go into a particular location by means of a zoning permit, then you have the operation of that shop, which is really under the supervision of the select board. The select board has done a good job, at least in my opinion, of policing the operations of liquor licenses, and I hope they'll do the same with marijuana licenses.
Thank you very much. And beginning with you, Mr. Boland, what specifically is the worry with situating marijuana businesses of either kind in an L district? Specifics, please.
Could you please repeat that? I missed the first few
Absolutely.
words.
What specifically is the worry with situating marijuana businesses of either kind in an L district?
Okay.
Specifics, please.
Yes, it's really a very simple thing. The closer you put this kind of thing to young people, the more normal you make it seem, the more likely that a young person is going to think, oh, it's okay, I can try it. It probably won't hurt me. Most kids may try it a few times and may not get hurt, but then there's those few who seem to get into a deep cycle. Every one of those is a life that is essentially lost. That's the concern.
Ms. Pelkey.
Well, I think those concerns are going to be there whether the business is in Boston, Newton, Brookline, G, L, it's all, this is relitigating the question of should we legalize or not, and we've already voted on that.
Very good, thank you. And Ms. Pelkey, are we protected from super strong marijuana? Are we protected from additives, some of which are psychoactive and are harmful? Who will pay for enforcement?
My understanding is that the Cannabis Control Commission handles all the testing of products sold, and they do have standards about strength, additives, et cetera. The town is not responsible for that testing, but they would undoubtedly be looking at the reports from the testing.
And who will pay for enforcement?
Enforcement in terms of having bad results in the testing would be the business owner. In terms of enforcement, this is one of the impacts that we pledge to pay for out of the host community agreement. So for instance, if it costs more for police or the inspection details by public health or whatever enforcement mechanisms we choose to impose, that will be an additional burden to town staff, and that is part of what the funding of the 3% is going to go towards.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Boland, same question.
Well, it's really the state that has the responsibility for doing the things that the question asks. The local communities don't regulate the strength of marijuana or the purity of it. But the thing also to keep in mind is that the marijuana that you will get today, whether legally or not legally, is not the same stuff that folks like me might have heard about or even tried 50 years ago when we were in college. Instead of something that's full of big leaves and twigs, you got all these little buds, they call them, that come from the flowering plant. The concentration of the active ingredients is far greater, and the danger that someone may become habituated to them and may begin to depend on them is also far greater.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. And now, beginning with you, can you compare and contrast the proposed rules around marijuana, social retail, with analogous rules for liquor stores or bars?
I cannot. I'm not a personal expert on these kinds of things because the rules get extremely complicated. If you have been at the Board of Selectmen many times, as I have, listening to the liquor license hearings, you know that the details of these rules become very complicated, very specific, and that only somebody who basically gives over a good chunk of their lives to mastering this stuff is going to know all those particulars. I'm afraid I'm not one of those people.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. Ms. Pelkey.
I interpret the question differently. To me, it sounds like someone is asking, why are we imposing all of these locational restrictions and citing density restrictions on marijuana shops when we do not do the same for liquor stores or bars? We do not have the same level of restriction on where those uses are located.
Thank you. Final question. How would sale of pot in storefront operations jibe with federal law which prohibits the sale of marijuana? Ms. Pelkey.
Well, I think we all know the answer to that one. No, and we hope they don't come after us.
Well, we've had a little bit of clarification, if I can. The Obama administration, as many people will remember, told the district attorneys to lower the priority. And the district attorneys did that. It basically meant that if you were in a jurisdiction such as Colorado or Washington, where it had been legalized under state law, that unless you did something pretty egregious, the feds were not going to bother you. The new administration has walked that back to some degree, and we can't be sure that they will do it. We just had, however, a statement from the district attorney for the Southern District of New York saying he's going to follow the old rules. We haven't heard anything comparable to that for the district attorney for Massachusetts, so we just don't know yet.
Thank you very much. All right, time for closing statements. And Mr. Boland, we will begin with you, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I want to return to where I began, with neighborhoods. I feel that we're in unknown territory. We have 4 states in the country, they're all on the West Coast, that have some significant experience with this a few years. No states in our part of the country that have any significant experience. we're in a guessing game. We hope, and maybe we'll be lucky, that we don't have serious problems. But if we do, if we're not lucky, it'll behoove us to take our time to make sure that what we do is not going to expose the community to any more hazards than have to come along when we do what the state is going to require us to do. One of the hazards that we don't have to have is to put marijuana shops into local business zones. The health of the neighborhoods is the health of the town. The health of the town is the health of the neighborhoods.
Thank you. Ms. Pelkey, 3 minutes.
I think it's understandable why we're all feeling a little anxious, because this is new territory, and we all can't really predict how it's going to go. You know, we just don't know. But I want to remind everybody about why we did legalize and why Massachusetts voted for recreational marijuana. Of course, there was the issue of mass incarceration and prohibition not being effective. The war on drugs is not working. It doesn't work. We don't want to lock people up for seeking relaxation or changing their consciousness. These are things that humans seek to do, whether they do it through alcohol, marijuana, other drugs. And to me, it has always seemed a little hypocritical to think it's socially acceptable and okay to have alcohol everywhere, which can kill people and ruins many, many more lives than marijuana has ever been known to do. So as far as the L and G districts, I'll just reiterate that my feeling is that we should have smaller shops in several disparate locations rather than grouping them in Coolidge Corner and the Village, which is where we have the G districts.
Thank you. Thank you both very much.
Okay.
Okay, so we want to get out of the display entirely.
Are you?
Did you mean to do that? Yeah. Okay. Here I am. This is pardon me? Okay. So we have Richmond and David Goldstone have come to the front, or Gladstone, excuse me, have come to the front already, and thank you both very much. This is a discussion of Warrant 31 and about sustainable food containers. And Clint Richmond is going to be speaking in favor of the warrant, and David Gladstone is going to be speaking against. He's from the Chamber of Commerce. So we begin with the pro, and you have 6 minutes, Mr. Richmond.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Clint Richmond, here representing the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, the sponsor of this warrant article. SWAC is a town committee appointed by the Select Board. Our goal is to minimize, our goal for municipal waste is zero waste, which has many benefits, including reducing dollar costs and has beneficial climate impacts. In order to reach this target, everything needs to be reusable, compostable, or recyclable. Things that don't fit into these categories should have programs whereby producers take these products back. One of the most problematic categories of waste is plastics. Plastics basically appeared in the 1980s and have been growing rapidly ever since. They have replaced natural materials such as glass, paper, and metal, which are recyclable and or compostable. Paper and metal in particular are relatively valuable as recycling. Some plastics can be valuable, but they're light, which requires a large volume, and there are many types, and separation can be difficult. Much of this is downcycled into even more problematic products like carpet backing or plastic lumber. Some types like polystyrene and PVC, and some products like straws and utensils are not recyclable. Please don't put them in your recycling cart. All plastics are toxic upstream. We need to take responsibility for that, especially for those who work and live near refining and manufacturing plants, which generally aren't in Massachusetts, by the way. Some plastics are potentially more toxic to us consumers, polystyrene, PVC, and PET, or polyethylene terephthalate, and should definitely be avoided. Finally, plastics are a huge litter problem that is harming wildlife and their habitats, especially in the ocean, which is one reason why coastal communities have taken the lead on this issue. But of course, Brookline's not exempt to this, and on my way over, I noticed many straws and utensils from the few blocks from my house. I also serve as the co-chair of the Green Caucus of Town Meeting. In 2011, when the Green Caucus was founded, we discussed how some places were regulating plastic packaging, but not Brookline. The long-term goal is to eliminate single-use plastics as much as possible through substitution or reduction. In 2011, the only places in Massachusetts regulating packaging were Nantucket with bags and food containers, and Great Barrington with polystyrene food containers, which both passed theirs way back in 1990. In 2012, town meeting passed two bylaws, one for bags and one for polystyrene. However, there were some issues that required updating both of these laws. In 2016, we updated the bag law, which was the more serious situation, and started the process for packaging, which has resulted in the present article. Warrant Article 31 will do four things. One, expand the definition of packaging to include more products such as straws, utensils, packing peanuts, and single-use coolers. Two, expand the types of plastic materials to include other more toxic types, PET and PVC. Three, require sustainable substitutes that are reusable, recyclable, and compostable. Four, expand the retail sector to include the sale of foam products only, such as cups and dishes in bulk. This is a logical step forward, not a complete solution. Locally, Provincetown, Wellfleet, and Cambridge have implemented parts of this already. Other jurisdictions, such as Nantucket and several counties in California, have gone much further. Brookline has inspired dozens of other communities in New England to take similar action. Our health department has accumulated experience in education and enforcement and has served as a model elsewhere. Working with the planning department, the Economic Development Advisory Board, and other town bodies, we've listened to the community and made several adjustments to this proposal. The law continues to allow for various exemptions where the transition is not feasible. Finally, the bylaw does not go into effect for food establishments until 2020, so there's plenty of time to plan and prepare. I'm a huge supporter of local businesses. My family believes in local first. However, packaging is a minuscule percentage of the total cost of a takeout meal, and I would add that fine dining is basically unaffected except for leftovers. The big costs are labor, food, and overhead like rent and utilities. The school department estimated that the average impact of this bylaw would only be 4% per meal in the cafeterias. This bylaw provides a path and a level playing field for a more sustainable future that we hope the business community will embrace. We have seen so much progress in the last 6 years. Many businesses are taking steps voluntarily as the supply and demand for more sustainable products has increased. Some, like Cuddy's, make it part of their brand. Support has been nearly universal from the Select Board, Advisory Council on Public Health, EDAB, Green Caucus, PACS, Green Space Alliance, and Mass Sierra Club. We ask that the public and town meeting support favorable action on this bylaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gladstone, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. So my name is David Gladstone. I'm a banker in town with Brookline Bank. I'm a business development officer, and I work every day of the week with small businesses. I'm on the Chamber of Commerce. I'm a vice president of Coolidge Corner, and I'm on the Government Affairs Committee, and I interface with the town on any and all issues that impact business. I'm on the Select Advisory Board for Climate Action. I'm a member of the Merchants Association of Coolidge Corner. I've been in banking for about 18 years, and prior to that, I had a storied career in retail for about 15 years. So I want to talk about Article 31 and talk to what Clint's been saying. The Chamber, as a whole, views this as a state issue. It's great that Brookline is taking this on, but at the end of the day, it's going to create an uneven, competitive environment for our small businesses. Article 31 would impact all food establishments in town, except any establishments which are in catering. Said exemption for commercial caterers will help this small group of business people, numbering about 30, but will punitively damage all of other food establishments to try to increase their business through outside sales offerings of their menus. The competition for menu items in restaurants across both city-town lines will impact Brookline businesses. If this article is implemented, businesses outside of town will have an unfair pricing advantage over those town businesses which are forced to comply with the new article requirements. The new article requirements will force non-catering businesses to source even more biodegradable containers at a much higher expense per unit than they currently now do. You said 5% increase per meal. The town has figured out for the school department that this cost of compliance is going to increase the cost 600%. Another question to raise here is, why isn't the above-mentioned article a townwide initiative? Why is it only being placed on small business? If this is such a great measure, why isn't it townwide? Most commercial businesses already pay for their own trash removal at pretty much no expense to Brookline, and in addition, a lot of businesses' trash does not even enter our trash stream. Most businesses want to grow and flourish in Brookline. This article, while well-intentioned, should be left to the state legislature to impose statewide regulations, which would incur costs to all, not just Brookline businesses. It's for this reason that the Chamber of Commerce can't support such a measure, which would be viewed as punitive on small businesses and hurt their abilities to compete both in and outside of town. The Chamber recommends a no vote for town meeting members on this action. And how much time do I have left?
1 minute.
Okay, well, I'm going to do this fast. I'm trying to bring this up to the future, or sort of the present. Top 10 reasons why Article 31 is wrong for the town. Town residents are exempt from this measure, as well as non-catering small businesses. Why is that? Most town small business owners live outside of Brookline. Reason number 9, not enough research has been done to understand the impact on small business. Clint nor Economic Development spoke to private schools, churches, temples, daycare centers, and after-school programs. The Economic Development Subcommittee voted in favor of this, but this is punitive on all small businesses inside of Brookline. Restaurants impact their revenue by doing more volume on takeout and party platters. Everyone says that the places will pass the increase on to their customers, but you can only do that so much, even within a 600% increase on the cost of takeout items. Catering establishments number 30 got grandfathered, but not to the rest of the food purveyors. While outside of Brookline, JP, West Roxbury, Brighton, and downtown, this won't apply. How many people here order food online and cross the town lines? Solid Waste Advisory Committee also voted for this measure, but again, most waste from small businesses doesn't get recycled into the trash system of the town. This is the second time that Clint and the Plastics Committee has targeted small business to pay more, creating an unfair environment both in town, since residents are exempt, and outside of town, with area competition exempt because their town hasn't passed a similar measure. Our local businesses need to stay more competitive than less.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'll have additional opportunities. All right, our first question, and Mr. Gladstone will begin with you. How will this bylaw apply to medical facilities such as hospitals and nursing homes in which patients may need straws in order to drink?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I don't think that anyone spoke to hospitals or nursing homes with regards to this issue. I know that when we were in committee, one of the committee members who were here was talking about straws, and it's very important for people who have disabilities. And there are straws that are out there, but they're much more expensive.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone. Mr. Richmond.
So yes, straws has come up. We've reviewed this with the Department of Public Health, Mr. Maloney. They had to go through this transition already in 2012, and they were able to work with them to make that transition possible. We've brought the issue of straws up specifically with them, and if there's a medical need for someone to have a straw, that would be an exemption under our exemptions.
Very good. Hold on, I think we have another couple of questions coming, but they're being sorted. Given the cost to the environment of plastic pollution, are you arguing that profit is more important than our sustainability? And Mr. Richmond, we begin that with you.
No, I think they go hand in hand, and I think people want to shop at places that they know are environmentally responsible. So that's why we're bringing this. I mean, I support local businesses, but I want them to be sustainable at the same time.
Thank you. Mr. Gladstone, 90 seconds.
That's a good question. I would say that businesses by far want to do the right thing, but at the same time, they still need to remain competitive. If you look around Coolidge Corner and you look around some other areas, there are many empty storefronts right now because the rent has become so expensive. Insurance is expensive, the cost of raw materials is expensive, and everyone believes that basically small business will keep on passing this on to the consumer. At a certain point, you hit critical mass. And I guess the question I would ask back is, do we want to risk having more empty storefronts in Brookline?
Beginning with you, aptly, Mr. Gladstone, please explain how the huge percentage figure was derived, your figure about increased cost 600%.
Okay, so this was done by economic development. This isn't a number that I used, and this is a number I didn't derive. The town derived it for the school department. They figured out within the supply chain how much it would cost to get biodegradable materials versus recyclable materials, okay? So the biodegradable materials will break down in the landfill. The other items won't break down in the landfill, but they can get recycled to an extent. But there is materials in this that allows them not to go into the landfill. The new stuff priced out in the supply chain is not readily available in all areas. And at the end of the day, the supply has not caught up to the demand, and it's very expensive to order these things in right now. And it is a 600% cost increase based on what the town and the school department and economic development found out.
Mr. Richmond, same question?
So the increase looks worse when you present it on a percent basis per item. But as I said, the school department calculated it as 4 cents per meal. Catering by Andrew came to the EDAB meeting and said that for utensils, the overall increase was 30%. So it depends on the item. I should point out, though, that this bylaw does not require compostable materials necessarily, except in the case of things that aren't recyclable, like straws and utensils. But for regular food containers, polypropylene is a competitive material and would still be allowed and is recyclable.
Thank you. And then beginning with you, can you clarify what will be banned? Mr. Richmond, thank you.
So as I said, we already banned polystyrene except for straws and utensils, so those would be added. And in addition, we would ban polyvinyl chloride, and which is not very common in foodware, and PET, P-E-T-E, which is very common, and those are more toxic plastics. So I mean, I'm hoping that, again, that the business community will want to take a look at some of their materials, or maybe they won't have to with this because they'll be, it'll sort of be automatic. They don't have to say, oh, which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. The law is sort of giving you that guidance, so you don't need to investigate. And the Department of Public Health is, ready to advise businesses on the more sustainable alternatives.
Mr. Gladstone, same question. Can you clarify what will be banned?
Well, basically, the town economic development has come out with a listing. Do you happen to have that listing?
Okay. But there's a
Well,
little handy
it pretty much
chart.
spells out by category what is allowed now and what will be allowed in the future. So there's specific items, straws. I mean, basically, we've already switched over on the cups. We've already switched over on the lids. We're talking about straws. We're talking about forks, knives, spoons. We're talking about platters, takeout containers, things like that.
Thank you. Mr. Gladstone, beginning with you. What food service ware and packing materials have the most readily available sustainable alternatives? What items are the biggest challenge?
Okay. Right now, as we see it, and I've spoken to about 50 different restaurants, it's the availability in the supply chain of these items that we're going to be switching to. They are not readily available from all suppliers. So imagine this for a second, that you have to now order from, right now you can order from one supplier, and as a result of this edict, you're going to have to find 4, 5, or 6 different suppliers to be able to find this material, to be able to comply with what the town article dictates. And at the end of the day, it's much more expensive and there's much more time involved in sourcing this out. They are not readily available at this point in time. One hopes down the line that they'll catch up, but right now, it's not in the supply chain.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone. Mr. Richmond, would you like the question read again? Or?
Yes, please.
What food serviceware and packing materials have the most readily available sustainable alternatives? What items are the biggest challenges?
Nearly all items are available with substitutes. There are some that are more problematic and again would be part of the exemption process. So party platters is one that we've heard is not readily available. Hot cups that are utensils and straws that work with hot beverages and hot foods like soups, spoons might be difficult. So again, those could be exempted, or maybe it'll spawn a return to reusables. I mean, in many ways, we're going to go back to the future with this. We survived without all these products, 30 years ago, and I think we can do it again.
Hearing no additional questions, then we're going to move to closing comments. And Mr. Gladstone, you get to begin, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Whoop. Don't worry, I'm not going.
You answered that last one first, right? Okay, all right. So we're going to begin with you. Thank you.
Ready.
Do you have figures regarding what proportion of food or medicines, food or meals purchased in Brookline involves non-reusable packaging or utensils? So do you have figures regarding what proportion of food or meals purchased in Brookline involves non-reusable packaging or utensils?
Well, I would say most of the fast food is using, single-use materials. But I don't have a specific figure.
Okay. Mr. Gladstone?
You can answer that question a couple different ways. Catering by Andrew, as an example. If he's going to a temple or he's going to a wedding, he's typically using flatware, silverware, stoneware, glasses. So for the regular catering genre, where it's occurring at a formal event, that gets reused and cleaned. Whereas if you're doing a clam bake, or if you're going out to a barbecue, sometimes they'll use flatware, sometimes they'll use stoneware, but a lot of the times, the cleanup to make it easier, they use the disposable ware. So it depends upon the situation, but I think the vast majority of stuff outside of catering is, as Clint said, it's single use. In restaurants, if you're sitting down, you're using the flatware, the stoneware. If you're taking it to go, it's single use.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Gladstone, beginning with you, what about plastic water bottles?
Well, you're going to open up a whole can of worms there. The town looked at this, and they did a study, and I think that it's worth looking at. I know there's a lot of people that don't use plastic bottles. They have their own bottles. Linda had a permanent bottle tonight. I think it's good if you can do that, but the other problem is with this is if you don't have plastic water bottles and people need to fill up the water, that's where the problems begin. People will want to walk into an establishment and say, hey, can you fill this up? And there's town codes of where and how you can fill it up. So we would have to figure out watering stations, water fountains, water faucets, where the public would have the right to have access to be able to fill up their bottles. In some restaurants right now, if you go to them, they offer water, and you can go into like Lee's Hamburgers, you can go into a few, Refurlo, and a bunch of other places, and they actually have permanent water containers where you can fill up a glass with water.
Very good. Mr. Richmond?
Well, like Ms. Pelkey, I use a permanent water bottle, a metal one. I recommend those, not polycarbonate. But anyway, this bylaw does not apply to food that's packaged outside of Brookline, so bottled water would not apply. But as I said before, you know, this is just an incremental step to get us to that goal of zero waste and zero single-use plastics. We can't keep using plastics because they're made out of natural gas and petroleum, which are subsidized. This is one of the reasons the cost is low. So we need to get off of that. So, you know, maybe at a future town meeting, someone will bring that forward.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond. And then, how does this apply to religious institutions in Brookline? Mr. Richmond, beginning with you.
Any establishment that is a licensed food establishment will be required to comply, except for, as was pointed out, for businesses that are primarily caterers, and it will only apply to their catering orders. So, to use Catering by Andrews, since they're very prominent here this evening, they have a small retail establishment, which I've bought some very delicious latkes at, I might add, and that's already subject to our current polystyrene law and would be subject to this law as well.
Mr. Gladstone.
Pretty much, I was at an event last Sunday, and the caterer came in from New York. It was an Orthodox Jewish event, and they used a caterer from New York. So I think that, you know, this has to be well thought out, because not every single caterer is going to be from Brookline, coming in from the outside.
Thank you. And hearing no more questions, one more question. Mr. Richmond, beginning with you. Why are the proposed penalties so low? It looks like it says $100 per offense. Is that correct? But an establishment can't get penalized more than every 7 days.
Fines, which really haven't been applied in Brookline, because again, we have, you know, a good Department of Health, and I think very cooperative businesses. It was some part of some standard language that was inherited, so it's not being changed with this bylaw, and similar, I mean, it's not meant to be punitive in that sense, but, you know, I think it's really as a last resort, so it's not meant to be, you know, again, a burden in that sense. It's just a sort of a reminder.
A nudge.
This
Mr.
fine
Gladstone.
structure was reestablished on the first go-around during the first cycle of things. The town has been pretty understanding. I mean, the inspectors come out and they're trying to inform small business of what they need to do. Most businesses want to do the right thing. It's a matter of finding the available product at a proper price so that they can make a living.
One more look at the audience. I see no blue cards waving. Mr. Gladstone, I think it's safe to take your 3 minutes.
Thank you. This article is well-intentioned. Most businesses want to grow and flourish here in Brookline. This should be left to the state legislature to impose a statewide regulation which would incur costs to all, not just Brookline businesses. Brookline as a town has always been welcoming to small businesses. Currently, there are many expenses which are spiraling out of sight: rent, insurance, payroll, cost of goods, competition with the internet, and so many more. The town needs to celebrate the fabric of our community, not only with our residents, but also with our industry, services, and small businesses. There are currently enough empty storefronts in our town. This measure could add more to the list, and I heard this term tonight, of our treasured local businesses. It's important that we help our businesses as well. Most of these people do not reside in town. They don't have much of a voice in town with regards to regulations. They want to do the right thing They want to do the right thing for the economy. They want to do the right thing for the environment. Me as a business person, I'm involved with climate action as a business person. There's a way to do things while incurring a proper cost or an expense. I again raise the question to both Clint and the people who are going to vote for this measure, why is this not a town-wide measure? Why is it being simply imposed on small business? Thank you.
Mr. Richmond, 3 minutes.
Thank you. So a couple things. I'm sorry to see the debate sort of centering that this will somehow be the straw that, no pun intended, breaks the camel's back there. It's the other costs that Mr. Gladstone mentioned, rent, insurance. These are real issues for businesses. I don't really think that straws is what's driving empty storefronts in the town of Brookline. Secondly, Mr. Gladstone is asking about why isn't this being imposed town-wide, and I think by that you mean on the residents as a whole. And as was discussed at the subcommittee hearing, it is, because we're rolling out an initial first step on the retail sector in that you won't be able to buy styrofoam products in bulk at stores in Brookline. So they'll have to switch to something else. So, for the businesses, it doesn't matter if you need to go in and get some plastic cups or plates, or maybe hopefully there'll be paper. You won't be able to buy polystyrene foam ones. So we're starting to take a step there. It's going to lag behind what's going on in the food establishments, but we're starting to do that, as has been done, as I said, in some of these other locations, Wellfleet, Williamstown, San Francisco, California is an example. They've banned everything made out of styrofoam, including egg cartons, which we're not doing in Brookline. To answer Mr. Gladstone's question about the state level, I totally agree with him, but anybody who's worked at in terms of advocacy down at the State House, and I'm there quite often, knows that a lot of times you need to build up support at the local level before the legislators will take notice. We have 75 plastic bag bans, and this year, maybe, the legislature will consider doing it, not as strong as we like, but still a very good law. We only have 25 with polystyrene, so we're on our way to getting the attention of the legislature, but it has to be done first. And I think it's going to be done in communities like Brookline that are more educated, are committed to the environment, and are willing to pay if it's necessary. And I don't think it is, because it's kind of buried in overhead, but if necessary, we'll pay a small amount more for our food in order to have a sustainable economy and a cleaner neighborhood. This will help cut down on litter, and I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
The final warrant article, if Brian Hochleiter and Scott Englander could step forward, they're in favor of grass, and then in favor of turf, could we have Mark Giglietti? Good. And the field supervisor for Brookline Soccer Club, and Bernard Green.
No, I am neutral on the grass versus turf. Yeah.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah, probably one of the meetings.
Right. All right. So we begin with 6-minute opening statements, and given that we have 4 people on the podium, we would ask you to allocate that time between yourselves and
Or between the 3 of them, not me.
Huh. Interesting.
Okay, that's fine. In that case, that's agreed upon, and that will be just fine. Thank you very much. So we begin with those in favor of the warrant article. And that, who is that identified as pro? Okay, so two of you?
Well, it's a
You're
little
not
bit
going to do pro and
complicated.
con? Okay, who's grass?
That was the first section.
Yeah. Which type, yeah.
Okay.
So I would be representing,
We're going to
To
be
an
starting
extent.
with Mark.
okay, synthetic
And-
grass.
And you have 6 minutes.
I have 6 minutes. Wow.
That's right, you have 6 minutes.
Wow, okay.
But you needn't use it all.
I will not. I worked so hard to get it down to 3. So, my name is Mark Giletti, and I am a board member of the Brookline Soccer Club. I'm also a coach. I've been coaching for 15 years, soccer and other sports, and I'm also a referee. First, thank you to the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk, especially Dan Salzman. Where's Dan? Dan, there we go. And Dan helped me with this process. I literally volunteered 2 days ago. Had really no idea what I was getting into. So Dan helped me a little bit to understand it. This is a lively debate that we're having about Cypress. Told me a little bit about the process, with why this is important, and also how I should behave. For example, if I disagree with somebody, I shouldn't get angry and call them names. And I told Dan I'd do my best. So we are all here for Cypress. I think we all care about Cypress. It's a beautiful, central community asset, not just a neighborhood park. And I think we all know what it looks like today. I think we all know that something needs to be done, okay? Cypress currently serves a lot of different uses, everything from high schoolers having lunch, neighborhood people walking their dogs, athletes playing organized sports, everything from a kindergarten child to an adult. We have lots of different uses here. We have toddlers playing in the playground. And I think where we have a problem is the design, what it's going to look like. And I think that's the great debate. But we all know something needs to be done. And I think the other part of the issue is how are we to decide on what is to be done? Okay, and I think some people will talk about that, right? And that will not be me. This issue of synthetic versus natural grass is not a new one. We've had this issue at Downs. I think we've had pretty good results. And I also want to remind people, because I think this has been confused at times in the conversation, that this is not AstroTurf. We're not talking about a carpet. We're talking about synthetic grass fiber. Okay. I would love to play on a beautiful grass field. I would love to play on Liverpool's beautiful grass field or Barcelona's beautiful grass field. But I have never seen one in Brookline, anything near a nice field. And there's reasons for that. Our weather, our climate, in terms of latitude, the amount of rain we get, the amount of usage we have in our fields. We have a very severe shortage of fields in Brookline. And we need to do more. We need to do more for recreational opportunity. We need to do more. We need to have more fields and more intensive use of the fields we have. How much time do I have? Oh, good. So, in my view, synthetic is the only way, and I'm going to make this argument, to increase our use, the intensity of our use of the fields we have today. Now, in many circumstances, whether you're at college, even a lot of high schools, but certainly professional fields, you have to know this, that they do not practice on the field they play in. We do not have that luxury here. So most grass fields that are high quality are used 2 to 3 hours a week, maybe 5 hours a week. Professionals who install the types of grass fields we would put in Brookline, recommend 10 to 15 hours a week. We use our fields at the rate of 50 to 60 hours a week. 15 hours is not enough. We do use Cypress 50 to 60 hours a week, and look at it. If we put in grass at Cypress, we will end up where we are now. So I also want to say, because I take a bit of like a little bit of a athletic perspective, a sports perspective. This is not only about athletes. You can go to Downs Field after the organized teams leave and see how the community uses that space. I was there last summer. I go there often, and a lot of people are on that field. Even when the athletes are there, people are squeezing onto little corners of that field to play on it for anything, not just organized sports, not just sports. Even the cheerleaders were on that field because they refused to go on the grass. We know at Downs what that grass field is like and what it's going to end up with when after we renovate it for a lot of money and then we overuse it again, it's going to look like that again. People like being on turf. Closed.
Very good. Okay.
So just to clarify, so Bernard Green is here. He's going to talk about the process of how this decision will happen. He's not taking a position on grass versus turf. I just want to be clear about that. So Bernard, if you could go ahead and give us that explanation.
Okay, I'll do that now. So a couple of days ago, I was asked to address this issue, and probably like you, I'm wondering, why am I here? So, as Dan said, the Select Board has not taken a position on the grass versus turf matter. And actually, we have not discussed the issue of whether the town meeting or the Park and Recreation Board should decide this issue. But as the executive body of this town, we're always concerned about how decisions are made, and concerned that decisions are made through a process that is appropriate, that is defensible, and is sustainable. We have a process. Could you put that bylaw on? We have a process that addresses this particular issue, which I thought the topic of this panel was whether to send a bylaw to town meeting on the issue of grass versus turf, or to let the Park and Recreation Board handle it. So we have a Park and Recreation Commission bylaw 3.16, and yes, I wonder why it's singular park, because we have many parks in this town, but it's Park and Recreation. And what that bylaw does, it gives the Park and Recreation Commission authority to prepare annually a program for the, it says construction, alteration, and repair of parks. And that is then approved by the Select Board. And in fact, that's in the CIP for the year. The value of that process is what, the Select Board, I think, is very much concerned with, because it requires, and you'll see that in section 3.16.2, a design review committee that addresses issues of historical, cultural, aesthetic, and open space values of the town as it relates to the program for the construction, alteration, and repair of parks. So we have a process that brings in expert opinion, thinks through the issues from the standpoint of those matters, looks at the various sides of the issue, and comes up with a final proposal that is the result of a competent process that is defensible as well as sustainable. It may be a compromise, it may not be what everyone wants, but it's a process that gets us to the best position that we can get to. So, from the standpoint of the board, and again, we have not discussed this, but as the executive body of the town, our concern is a process that results in a resolution or decision on something like this that addresses how do we ensure that the end result is a good decision, if not the perfect decision. So, that's our position. Can I also add something regarding the last panel? The Bottled Water Committee was raised by one of the presenters, and I chaired that committee, and I want to tell everyone that as a result of the deliberations of that committee, your parks now have working clean fountains that you can use. Not all of them, right? We're in the process of getting those fountains in some of the parks. And the town has purchased a water truck so that when we have big events, a truck will go out to the event, hook up to the fire hydrant, and provide free water from water spigots for your bottles as well as water fountains that you can drink out of directly. What that is saying is that it's not just banning bad things like plastic water bottles that's important, but providing people alternative ways in which they can get the essential product, water, freely and from a good source. So.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for
No,
throwing
no.
that.
That was such good news. It's good you shared it. That's lovely. Thanks. And you still had 1 minute left to spare.
I'll cede that to whoever wants it.
No, we'll give Mr. Englander and Mr. Hochleitner as, you have 6 minutes between the two of you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very good.
Great. Well, thank you. My name is Scott Englander. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 6, member of the Green Caucus, and a Brookline resident of 26 years. In Brookline, we've inherited a wonderful public park system, and with that legacy comes an obligation to maintain and protect it. Cypress Park, the largest park in this dense Brookline neighborhood, was acquired in 1871 as one of America's first municipal parks. And since then, it's been heavily used by residents nearby and others for nearly 150 years. With grass that's worn from heavy use over many years, as you've heard, we all agree that the park needs renovation. As a parent and step-parent of boys involved in Brookline sports from pre-K through teenage years, one currently a BHS sophomore who's on 2 varsity teams, including football, I understand our shortage of fields, and I would support a much-needed town-wide planning and investments to fix that. But for Cypress, I think natural grass on native soil is the right choice. Now, this issue is much bigger than grass versus plastic, and Brian's going to speak to that. But let's talk about it for a moment. Green plastic isn't real green space, which Brookline could use more of, not less of. Many residents who have little or no private outdoor space rely heavily on Brookline's parks. And losing 3.5 acres of green space at Cypress would really change the sense of place there. Plastic turf would make Cypress less inviting and usable to the many people, especially seniors and kids, who don't play active team sports and instead use the park for other purposes, to relax, play, eat lunch or dinner, walk a dog, sunbathe, attend graduation, or just listen to the crickets. Plastic gets really hot and contributes to global warming and urban heat island effects, and grass cools and has other environmental benefits, soaking up stormwater and as a habitat for birds and bees, insects, and wildlife.
So I'm Brian Hochleitner. I'm also a town meeting member from Precinct 6, where the Cypress Park is located. Also a parent. I've got a 2nd grader and a 6th grader who are both active users of Cypress, playing rec and travel soccer, lacrosse, baseball. My son has gone to Viking sports camp there in the summers. And I'm sort of a little bit on my background. Before, years ago, I worked in New York City as chief of staff for capital projects for New York City's 28,000-acre park system. So I was involved in literally hundreds of park reconstruction projects, including many projects looking at fields that were heavily used in New York City, and we were considering decisions like this, including, in some cases, installing artificial turf fields, in some cases doing grass. I just want to say I agree with what Scott said. I think that the answer at Cypress Park is grass, but I also recognize that it's a difficult question and there's different viewpoints, and depending on your perspective, you come down in different spots. I'm here to talk about the question of who should decide and whether it should be a question for town meeting to vote on, or whether it's a question that should be left entirely to the purview of the Parks Commission. Now, why not give the Parks Commission full control? There's a couple reasons. One is the Parks Commission isn't elected. They're appointed by the select board, but they're not directly elected, and so they can't really speak for the voters of Brookline. Secondly, they don't have authority. Selectman Green pointed to the bylaw, which deals with the process of design, but they don't have authority over budget. Budget is a question that's entirely within the purview of town meeting, and with respect to capital budget matters, individual projects are presented to town meeting with descriptions of the projects, and it's not unusual for there to be conditions placed on funding. Town meeting is our most democratic body across town. Elected at the local level, it's a place where people in individual neighborhoods can have a voice. Obviously, I'm not saying that town meeting should decide every issue when it comes to a park design. I think that there's many things that town meeting shouldn't get involved in. But I think that when it comes to budgetary questions, when it comes to sort of policy questions, those are appropriate for town meeting to weigh in. In this particular case, there's a significant budget issue. The differential in cost for doing a comprehensive reconstruction of the grass areas at Cypress Park, the cost is about $500,000, and that would include grading and drainage and installing new grass throughout the field and other improvements. The cost for plastic turf is approximately 4 times that. It's about $2 million. So town meeting is basically being asked at this point to make a decision without getting the full information about what they're funding. I think it's important to remember that it's a policy judgment for town meeting to think about these things. We think that they should be asked to weigh in on that question. So to talk for a minute about the neighborhood and the precinct, Precinct 6, where the park is located, 14 out of the 15 elected town meeting members have come out in support of grass and against plastic turf. This is not a NIMBY neighborhood. This is the neighborhood that came out and specifically came in favor of expansion of Brookline High School across the street from the park. I just want to talk a little bit about process. The normal process for park reconstruction involves a scoping meeting where you make decisions about things such as, are we going to put in artificial turf or grass? In this case, there have been 3 scoping meetings in September through December 2017, and the Park Commission specifically made a decision to not weigh in one way or another, to come to town meeting and to effectively ask for a blank check in terms of what town meeting is being asked to fund. We've brought this motion in order to ask town meeting to make a judgment call on that and to weigh in on this important policy question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. And then we do have a series of questions, and we'll begin with the team of Englander and Hochleitner. Does the town bylaw address who should make this decision?
Well, I think I touched on that a little bit. I think the town bylaw deals with the design review process. And I'll just kind of, again, give a little more detail on the process and the steps. So typically the way this works in park design projects, and this is how it worked in New York where I was involved, and I understand it's how it works here, is there's kind of an initial process where a project is identified. There's a public hearing at which members of the community and others are invited to come out. In this case, we actually had 3 meetings with members of the public, and it broke down on sort of a particular battle lines where you had a lot of folks from the neighborhood coming out strongly supporting grass over plastic turf, and then a number of people who came primarily from townwide organized sports groups who were focused on a different result. And so, those were heavily attended. There was a lot of strong opinions on both sides, and no decision was reached at those scoping meetings. I don't think it's appropriate to form a design review committee and turn over to them the decision on the scope of the project, which is a major, again, a budgetary question the town meeting should properly weigh in on. $2 million versus $500,000 is not something that you leave up to the designer or the design team to just make those decisions. That's something that town meeting should weigh in on.
Mr. Giletti, Mr. Green is actually here specifically to speak to this issue,
Yeah.
so if it's okay.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That's something I'm going to comment on.
Pardon me?
I said I don't know the bylaws.
Okay. I think the bylaw provides a process, including the scoping meeting, that addresses the. I think the bylaw provides a process that addresses all the issues that Brian mentioned, and the reason for this is to make sure that we go through a process that looks at all the issues and comes up with a relatively good solution. Yeah, town meeting could take this up, but I think one question is whether we're going to go around the processes established by our bylaws for any number of other matters that town meeting could also take up and consider. I don't think that's a good practice, and I think we should go with the process we have.
Thank you very much. All right, next question, and Mr. Giletti, we'll start with you. How does our experience with synthetic turf on Downs Field shape our expectations for the level of community usage with turf on Cypress Field?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this earlier, that at Downs Field, the experience has generally been seen to be good. People use it. When I've been there, there's far more people on the turf than on the grass. So, and my understanding, and I think this is going to come up more as time goes on, the community at Downs has been generally happy with the outcome. But that's something that they would have to, people at, in that community would have to say that for themselves. But I think it's been a generally good experience.
So you have 90 seconds between the two of you?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. How does our experience with synthetic turf on Downs Field shape our expectations for the level of community usage with turf on Cypress Field?
Well, I think that's a hard question to answer. The synthetic turf has been at Downs Field for quite some time, and so the uses of that field and the way it's used, of that park and the field, and the way it's been used for those many years has been shaped, I think, largely by what's there. The field and the entirety of Cypress Park is quite another story. I described the many different uses that anyone can observe going there on any given day. And the diversity there, I think, partly because of the central location within Brookline Village and surrounded by the high school is quite a bit different.
And I'll just add briefly to that, which is, I think Downs is quite different also because Downs is a much larger park where you've got a small piece of it that's artificial or plastic turf. It's also right next to the Emerald Necklace. There's plenty of opportunities for local neighbors there to make use of, kind of different uses in that sort of larger park network that touches upon Downs. And it's just simply not the case at Cypress, where you've got essentially a denser urban neighborhood with a smaller park, relatively speaking. And the proposal is, essentially to take the entire field area, which is approximately 3.5 acres, and convert it to artificial turf, which would, in effect, leave a small kiddie playground and a basketball court on one end, and not really space for those other uses.
Thank you very much. Okay, and then beginning with the two of you, What is the cost of real grass maintenance versus synthetic turf? And what is the maintenance guarantee if real grass is installed in the long term?
So this came up at one of the scoping meetings where the town's consultant was there, and they gave a couple of pieces of information about the cost of maintenance. So there was a comparison of costs. They noted that artificial turf is much, much more expensive up front, and they said, but there's a lot of cost savings over time because you have to put less maintenance in. And the question was asked, well, where does the cost savings come from? Are we planning to lay off town staff? Because the savings would come from reducing payroll of the folks that were actually out there maintaining it, and the Parks Commission made clear that there was no plans to do any layoffs, so there actually would not be a dime saved on the operational budget, and simply the result would be that the folks that were assigned to maintain Cypress would be assigned to parks in other neighborhoods. So there really isn't an actual dollar savings there. I guess in theory you get more maintenance of some other parks that you might not otherwise get, but I don't think that there's a cost savings.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Giletti.
We have a very large town budget, and we're talking about very small dollars here. I don't think that finding specific savings is the real issue. The other issue that's very, very important, for example, yes, there will be, if they're not needed at Cypress, there will be opportunities to redeploy people. We're talking about a handful of people or even a handful of hours. We're not talking about large departments of people that need to be moved around. This is not that big of a deal. The other thing is you really have to look at the cost per hour of usage, okay? We're going to get 10 to 15 hours of usage on a grass field, or we're going to end up with mud, okay? So instead of getting 50 or 60 hours of usage per week, we're talking about, and additional usage when it rains or when that field has to be set aside because of the rain and because the soil gets impacted when conditions are wet, and we have to set that field aside for recovery. We're talking about a very large number of uses over the course of 12 years compared to what we can get from grass that probably should also have a
Thank you very much,
resurfacing.
Mr.
Yeah,
Giletti. Thank you.
every few years.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so next question, Mr. Giletti, beginning with you. How often does the synthetic turf need to be replaced? When it is replaced, can it be recycled? Can the old turf be recycled? Is it biodegradable? And how does it compare with grass?
Yes, that's a big question. Manufacturers have increasingly looked to recycle the material for when it's used up and when it's being replaced over the past 10 or 15 years. The replacement cycle is approximately 12 to 15 years, depending how much it's used. Downs lasted for 12 years, and we're about to replace it right now. Okay, so that's pretty much, the term that a field will last, a synthetic field will last. And recycling is a big part of that in the future.
Recycling is, okay.
Recycling will be a big part of the replacement, for replacing synthetic
Thank you.
grass, they will be recycled, yes.
Okay, Mr. Englander and Mr. Hochleitner, and would you like the question reread, or?
No, I
Okay,
think we
very
have
good.
it.
And 90 seconds between the two of you.
Thanks. With regard to the life of plastic turf and recycling, one thing to keep in mind is that the manufacture of it and the recycling are very energy-intensive processes. And while certainly recycling is feasible and is done, it is energy-intensive, and there is a significant carbon footprint of it. And in the meantime, between when it's new and when you recycle it, a significant portion of plastic particles enters the environment.
Thank you very much. And then beginning with Englander and Hochleitner, Is there a possibility that the field can be partly turf for extended use by sports teams and reserve part of the field near the playground as grass?
So there were a number of different design options that were presented at the scoping meeting, and the only options that involved sort of maintaining portions of the field as grass required elimination of one of the fields on the site. So, you know, one of the rationales for installing artificial turf is that we've got a shortage of fields and we need more ways to intensify use of the fields that we have. So I'm not sure that, you know, there was no decision made at any of the scoping meetings on those options, but, you know, it would require eliminating one of the ball fields at the park, and I think, you know, that's not something that I think, you know, should be supported. I think we want to maintain the fields that we have and not reduce them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Giletti.
Yeah, at the scoping meeting, I was one of the people who suggested that we do something of a compromise in terms of turf and grass, to leave a very large portion of grass by the high school on Greenough, and that would serve most of the needs that we have. And it is true there may be one softball field that would be eliminated. I'm not sure about that 100%. But the problem with grass is not baseball and softball. The problem with grass is soccer and football, where they're in a typical soccer game, you may get several 100,000 cleat steps in one game by the players. That tears up a field. A turf field, a synthetic turf field that was dedicated to soccer would solve the problem. We recommended that, and to leave a large section of grass for other activities, I thought at the time, and I think many people felt, was a nice compromise.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Giletti, beginning with you. I understand town meeting has control over budgets. However, the turf versus grass question has many nuances, lifetime of field, reaction to severe weather, etc., and it has more nuances than budget. Is town meeting equipped to adjudicate all these questions?
You're asking that, will town meeting come up with a rational answer to a very difficult political question? Okay. I think ultimately there's a lot of emotion in this, and I think it's not necessarily purely rational, right? And I don't think that we're all going to agree on the best outcome. I think my colleagues here are thinking about the best outcome from their perspective. I'm thinking about the best outcome from my perspective. I think compromise is very possible. I think a bigger conversation about grass and turf throughout the town is a very important one to have as well. But in this particular location, we have processes in place to make design decisions. The cost of renovating Cypress is going to be a few $1 million in a $200 million high school renovation. We're not talking about a big chunk of the budget. The difference between renovating and doing the drainage and everything for grass versus turf is not $2 million, okay? It's something less than that. I don't know exactly the number, but but just to do grass is also in the millions.
Thank you, Mr. Englander and Mr. Hochleitner.
So I think, well, at least based on the sort of budget numbers that were thrown out at the scoping meetings, the cost for a full grass reconstruction was $500,000 or thereabouts versus the turf, which was $2 million. So it's a $1.5 million difference. I do think it's important at this time when we, you know, just went for an override and we're going to need to go back for more overrides in the future to not sort of underestimate the importance of, you know, $1.5 million in a capital project. Just want to say a little something about kind of the process and sort of the budget and how it's going to be teed up at town meetings. So there is a motion by the advisory committee which includes in it language which says effectively that the construction funds for relating to Cypress Park can't be spent if this particular language gets included, which is proposed by advisory committee, can't be spent without coming back to town meeting for a vote on the field surface. And part of our motion was really thinking about, well, there's a separate line item for a couple $100,000 in design. And we didn't want there to be, kind of no discussion about the design funds, and that project gets funded and a design gets very far along in the process, so we're just about ready to break ground. The design line item actually talks about
Thank you very much, Mr.
preparation of-
Hochleitner.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, now, beginning again with the two of you, I'm going to ask a pair of questions. Regarding Article 7 and Cypress Field, grass and turf aside, what are the ramifications of setting a precedent of taking a decision of this magnitude out of the hands of the Park and Recreation Commission? And I'm going to pair that with, why bring this issue to town meeting rather than leave the fate of Cypress Park in the hands of the Parks and Recs Department?
Is that for us?
Yep, beginning with the two of you.
Okay. You want to talk?
Yeah, I can start. So I think certainly this decision should have been made during the scoping process, and it wasn't. This is a major aspect of the entire concept. It's not a design detail. The other thing is that I'm not sure what the questioner is referring to with regard to a slippery slope or change in the fundamental responsibilities of the commission or of town meeting. But town meeting does make decisions about budget items as we have, and this is a significant budget item, and a decision over that is before town meeting.
Thank you. And Mr. Green, would you care to comment?
I don't think I can add anything to that.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Giletti, do you care to comment?
Yes. I think the amount of funding is a little small for town meeting to make a decision on. They're voting on very large budget items. Someone said nonsense. Okay. I think what happened was there was very strong momentum in the direction of turf at Park and Recreation Commission. I think people didn't like that. I think they want to now make it a town meeting decision. That's how it sums up.
Thank you. All right. So, Mr. Giletti, beginning with you. Has there been any discussion of making Cypress Park a park? Is keeping it a field a done deal?
Well, it's a good question, because I've asked that too, and I understand a lot of perspectives that are going into this. I might want to say that if you're not going to do turf, you should keep it the way it is. If you're not going to use synthetic turf, you should keep it the way it is. Just keep it the mud pit that it is, okay? Putting in grass is going to give us the same outcome that we have today. And so there may be a very real question that grass is a complete waste of money in terms of an athletic field in this case, okay? That maybe it shouldn't be a field at all.
Very good. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Giletti. Mr. Englander and Mr. Hochleitner, would you care to comment on that?
Sure. So I think there's been a couple times tonight when there's been a reference to sort of hours of use and turf as being preferable from the standpoint of more hours of use. And actually at some of the scoping meetings, there were specific numbers that were given to calculate cost per hour of use and things like that. And one of the questions that was asked was, well, what counts as an hour of use of this park, this Brookline Park? What counts? And the answer was team sports on a field, playing each other in a game or practice. That counted as an hour of use that was sort of on the numerator in that formula. And I said, well, what about, someone walking their dog or going and having a picnic or, playing with their kids or playing catch in the grass or just laying in the sun or all the things that Scott mentioned earlier? What value was assigned to those hours? And the answer was $0 were assigned to that, and 0 hours. They weren't counted. And I think we have to remember that this is a park. It's a neighborhood park. It's a townwide park, but it's used by a lot of folks for a lot of different reasons, and that's got to be part of the way we think about it.
Thank you. Sort of along these same lines, how many days per year is Cypress currently closed, and would this change appreciably if renovated with grass?
Renovated with grass or
Yeah,
synthetic?
we're going to start with
Okay.
Scott Englander and Hochleitner, and, but I will, you want me to reread it?
No, I think we heard the question. We know that some of those numbers appeared in the information that was produced during the scoping process, and I don't recall what they are.
Yeah, I don't know what they are.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think any of us know how many days it was closed, but we do know it was closed.
Okay.
Every time it rains.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
But it won't, but renovating with grass is not going to change that. Renovating with synthetic grass will change that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Giletti, speaking, starting with you.
Yep.
What about high-performance grass? Is that being considered?
I think it was part, when they mean high-performance grass, they're talking about a drainage system and a type of soil, really a sand, that drains water more quickly and has certain properties that makes it more, so that you could use the grass more often. I don't know technically a lot about that, but I'm certain that that is not an option. According to Stantec, who put the study together, and I couldn't get the town, but he said the last time they put a field in like that, they ripped it out in 3 years. It was a disaster. So they would not recommend that action.
Okay.
Yes, I believe this option, grass on sand versus grass on native soil, was considered in some of the early, the first one or possibly two scoping meetings, and Stantec did do analysis, and I think there was fairly wide agreement that the benefits of it and did not outweigh the negatives, which included cost and additional fertilizer requirements and stormwater loading and et cetera.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, very good. And then beginning with two of you, suppose that we try to accommodate all sports use with grass fields only. How much more field space would then be required if it was to be compatible with the 10 to 15 hours recommended for grass fields, best practice? I'm curious about a town-wide figure in acres. Conversely, what if we centralized high-intensity sports use in a new, separate turf facility? How many acres of turf would be required town-wide?
Acres. How big is a soccer field? I don't know. Quarter of an acre?
Yeah, I guess I don't know the answers to the specific questions, but I do think that, this kind of question is getting at something important, which is that we don't really talk about kind of the town-wide needs on a town-wide basis. We do this ad hoc process where there's Cypress Park is on the capital improvement sort of next in line. It hasn't been renovated in 20 years, and there's a push by various people to install plastic turf there. There's other folks pushing back. We really need to step back. We need to do a more comprehensive process and really think about, I think it's not disputed that we have a shortage of fields. We need better, more available fields around town, and we need to think about how we get there, what investments we need to make. How do we plan about maintaining the grass fields better? I actually do not agree that all of our grass fields look terrible. I challenge anyone in this room to go up to Fisher Hill Park, which was reconstructed recently with a grass field. It's beautiful. I don't know why it's beautiful there. Go to Lars, it's nice there. Certain parks are not getting used the same as others. I get it. Some of them are right next to a school and there's recess and things like that, but then there's other things going on, and I just feel like we're not doing a good job of really thinking about this comprehensively. We can do better at town meeting. We can do better with the Parks Commission to think about these things and to take an approach that addresses this in a more comprehensive and thoughtful way.
Thank you very much. Mr. Giletti.
Yes, we agree on that statement. We agree on that. We certainly need a town-wide discussion, review of open space for additional fields. There's no doubt. Of course, the issue right now is Cypress, and the fact that Cypress is an issue makes people want to think about the bigger question as a way to avoid the current question, okay? I would be 100% behind looking at, and participate in looking at other areas within town for additional fields. The problem with grass field, Fisher Hill is a great example. We put that in about 2 years ago, didn't use it for a year. It's brand new, it's hardly used, it's beautiful. Geez, if we could do that in all of Brookline, have beautiful unused fields that were used twice a week, 3, 4, 5 hours a week, that would be awesome. We would all love to play on those fields, but it is not reasonable. We cannot afford Fisher Hill as a grass field.
Very good. Okay, all right. We're about to move then into closing statements. And I believe we begin with Eglander and Hochleiter.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. I won't repeat a lot of what we said earlier, but I do want to make the point, and again, I'll just, based on my own experience in working on a lot of park reconstruction projects, I think there's sort of a false choice that's being presented of, either we must install plastic turf or we must accept existing worn out field conditions at Cypress, and those are the only choices. I mean, I have seen on many occasions, parks that were reconstructed with proper drainage, grading, a lot of those things make a big difference in terms of the ability of a field to withstand heavy use. I'm not suggesting that, therefore, plastic turf is the same as, natural surface. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that it's not sort of this false dichotomy. I think it's important just to circle back on the point of, who decides on this. I think this is a really important issue for the town. It's an important issue for one of our most iconic parks. It's going to change the character of that park forever if we go down this route. And I think it's something that town meetings should, weigh in on, and not just, kind of write a blank check, I guess, in terms of the budget and hand it over to the Parks Commission. Thanks.
All right. Okay, great. Mr. Giletti.
Okay, I'm going to try to tackle the process issue a little bit. I know there are 2 motions out there for Article 7. One is about ensuring that town meeting does vote on grass versus turf issue. There's another one out there about trying to say that the high school budget can only be approved with the condition that no money is spent for turf. I think those are 2 distinct add-ons to the article. Okay? So that would cut off the debate about grass versus turf immediately. Okay? The grass versus turf issue has many supporters on both sides. It is a debate that's worth having. There are a lot of people who care on both sides of the issue. And when you care about both sides of the issue, it gives our community the energy to explore other opportunities. If the issue dies at Cypress, that energy will be lost, and we will still be left with a very severe shortage of fields with no solution in sight. Okay, so I want to just impress upon people that one of those 2 motions does not get passed, and I think the school committee, or the subcommittee of the advisory committee on the high school renovation, is considering that next week, I think May 22nd, as to whether to include that. I don't know a lot about that. Maybe you 2 know about that, or maybe you're sponsors of it. I would say that grass certainly has to be gently used if you want it to last, or we're going to end up where we are today. 10 to 15 hours is not a lot of time. on a grass field. Now, there's other uses, of course. Baseball does not tear up a grass field, nor does Frisbee playing. Soccer and football does, and that's what the issue is right now, is organized sports. We haven't yet, as a community, decided that we will not use Cypress as an athletic field. It's been used that way for decades, okay? So if it's being used as an athletic field, the only answer for maintaining its health will be either not to use it or to have synthetic turf. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for coming, everybody. One quick announcement. I understand that there are still several pens out there that belong to the people that are organizing it here, the questions. So please return the pens. Thanks to Brookline Interactive Group, League of Women Voters of Brookline, Town Meeting Members Association, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks very much. What's that? Yes. I'll tell you, there was one disaster that unfolded in slow motion that I'll tell you.